The ancient prophecy of Saint Malachy has sent shockwaves around the globe. It foretells that Pope Francis will be the final pope, with predictions of monumental events unfolding in 2024. This mystifying vision from the distant past has the world on tenterhooks, pondering the ticking of the cosmic clock. Pope Francis, a figure of modern change, now anchors this age-old enigma. Are we nearing the Vatican's last page? Join us as we delve into this prophecy, exploring the destiny that may lie ahead for us all. Saint Malachy, a man from Ireland, became very famous a long time ago because he was the first person from Ireland to become a saint in the Catholic Church, a big honor given by the Pope. Nowadays, many people talk about him because he made a big prediction about the future, especially about the popes, who are the leaders of the Catholic Church. This prediction is now very important because it said something special about Pope Francis in the year 2024. According to what Saint Malachy said a long time ago, Pope Francis is supposed to be the very last pope, and during his time, something very big and scary, like the end of the world, might happen. But what does this mean for us today? Could these scary events really happen soon? Saint Malachy saw the future of the Catholic Church and mentioned 112 different popes. Is this old prediction just a strange guess, or is it something we should think about more seriously? He was a very religious man from Ireland in the 1100s and is still remembered for his strong belief and dedication to his faith. The most important thing he left behind was a vision from the year 1139. In this vision, he wrote down names and descriptions for 112 popes. The very last name on his list was Pope Francis, whom he called Peter the Roman. This has made many people today wonder if we are living in a time that is very important for the Catholic Church. They think about what could happen if Saint Malachy's big prediction is correct, especially what it could mean for the year 2024. As Archbishop, Saint Malachy worked very hard to make sure the Irish Church followed the same rules as the bigger Roman Catholic Church. His work was very important at a time when the Church in Ireland was facing a lot of problems and needed someone strong to lead it. People loved Saint Malachy not just because he was good at organizing things, but also because he was thought to have special powers from God, which made many see him as a very holy man. His work and his strong belief helped the Church a lot and made him a beloved figure during his time and even long after he was gone. After Saint Malachy passed away in 1148, people didn't forget about him. In fact, he became more and more famous. By the year 1190, the Pope at that time, Pope Clement III, decided Saint Malachy had done so many good things that he should be called a saint. Saint Malachy had worked really hard to help the Irish Church get better and stronger. His story got even more interesting because people said he could predict the future, especially about the popes, which is why they started talking about the prophecy of the popes. Saint Malachy's big trip to Rome wasn't just a holiday. In 1139, he went there for a very important reason. He needed to talk to Pope Innocent II because he wanted to get special cloaks for the bishops back in Armagh and Cassel. This trip was a big deal because it showed he was really serious about making the Irish Church as good as the bigger church in Rome. This was a big part of his job in making things better for the Church in Ireland. But here's something that makes Saint Malachy really interesting. He had a vision, a kind of dream, that many people are still talking about today. This happened when he was in Rome, walking up the hills, talking to God in his heart. Suddenly, he went into a trance, like he was in a deep sleep but still awake. People believe that during this time, God showed him what was going to happen in the future, especially about the leaders of the Church, the popes. When he woke up from this deep trance, Saint Malachy made sure to write everything down. He wanted to make sure people in the future could know about his vision. But here's the strange part, nobody heard about this prophecy for a very long time, not until hundreds of years later, around the late 1500s. This made a lot of people wonder about the vision. Was it real? What does it mean for the future? This became a big topic for people who study the Church's history and for regular folks too. In his vision, Saint Malachy saw different Latin phrases, and he said each one was about a different pope. There were 112 of these phrases, starting from his time all the way to a time of big changes or scary events, which some people think might be the end of the world as described in the Bible. This long list of popes has made many people look closely at what he wrote to see if it's true. The part that gets the most attention is the very end, the part about the 112th pope, named Peter the Roman. This is where Saint Malachy's vision gets really famous because it's supposed to be about our times, and it makes people wonder what's going to happen next. We shift our focus to Pope Francis, fitting him into a prophecy from centuries past. His papacy might just align with these ancient forecasts. The dark path of Pope Francis. In the prophecy, it is said that this pope would be in charge when a lot of big changes or troubles happen. People have talked and wondered a lot about this, especially now that Pope Francis is in charge. He's thought to be the 112th pope, the same number mentioned in the prophecy. This has made many people think hard and talk about whether we are living in a very special time. They wonder if this old story about the future, told by Saint Malachy, is actually true or if it's just an interesting tale from the past. If it turns out to be true, then it would mean Pope Francis might be the last one listed in this very old forecast. Pope Francis, whose real name is Jorge Mario Bergoglio, started being pope in 2013. Since he became pope, a lot of people have paid extra attention to everything he does, especially the ones who know about Saint Malachy's prophecy. What's really interesting is that Pope Francis is the first pope who comes from the Jesuit group. The Jesuits, also known as the Society of Jesus, are known for their work in schools, for spreading their religion around the world, and for helping others. They are also known for thinking deeply and caring a lot about fairness and helping people in need. Understanding that Pope Francis is a Jesuit helps us understand how he handles being pope. The Jesuits have always played a big part in the Church's history, and they've often been at the center of big historical events. Being a Jesuit makes Pope Francis's time as pope even more interesting to people. The Jesuits started back in the 1500s thanks to Ignatius of Loyola, and they quickly became very well known. But their work wasn't just about religion, they got involved in the big issues of their time too. Because they were so involved, they sometimes bumped heads with the leaders of different countries and even with other groups in the Church. By the time the 1700s came around, the Jesuits were a big deal in Europe. But not everyone liked that. The Jesuits, a religious group in the Catholic Church, were kicked out from several countries in the late 1700s. Portugal was the first to send them away in 1759, followed by France in 1764, and then Spain and all the places Spain controlled in 1767. Even the Papal States, areas under the Church's control, had to let them go in 1773 because of a lot of pressure. There were many reasons for these expulsions. The kings and leaders of those times didn't like how the Jesuits were doing things. They thought the Jesuits were getting in the way of their power and their plans. Because of this, the Jesuits had to live far from their homes and couldn't do their usual work. They were in this tough spot until 1814, when Pope Pius VII allowed them to come back and start again. Pope Francis, who is part of this Jesuit group, is very interesting because of this tough history. Jesuits are known for studying a lot and thinking deeply about things, wanting to make the world fairer, and dealing with complicated political situations. They've had a hard time in the past, like when they were kicked out of those countries. But they've also learned how to keep going even when things get tough. This history could be shaping how Pope Francis leads the Catholic Church today, especially when he's facing big problems, both inside and outside the Church. Being a Jesuit means Pope Francis has a lot of experience with teaching and working with different kinds of people. Since he became Pope, Francis has talked a lot about big issues like protecting the environment, helping poor people, and making sure refugees are safe. These are all things Jesuits care about a lot. But being Pope isn't easy. Francis has had to handle some really big problems, like times when people in the church did bad things. These issues have caused a lot of upset and made people argue about how the church should handle these problems. Pope Francis has also had a tough time with some people in the church who don't agree with him. These disagreements have made his job as pope even more complicated. All these problems, along with his background as a Jesuit, add more interest to Pope Francis's role when we think about Saint Malachy's old prediction. Some people are watching him very closely, wondering if he's the last pope the prophecy talked about, especially with all his challenges. This situation makes Pope Francis's time as pope even more fascinating and important to people worldwide. The final chapter of Saint Malachy's vision. When we think about Pope Francis, who is believed to be the 112th and potentially the last pope mentioned by Saint Malachy, there's a lot more going on than just what he does or decides. His position is very special, not just because he's pope, but because according to the prophecy, he might be the very last one. His background with the Jesuits and all the changes and big discussions during his time as pope make people even more interested in what the prophecy said about him. Now, as we're getting closer to the year 2024, people are really starting to wonder, what will happen during the rest of Pope Francis's time as pope? Will the things he does match what Saint Malachy said would happen in the prophecy's final part? To really understand if Saint Malachy's prophecy tells the future right, we need to look at how what it said before matches up with the popes who came before. For example, the prophecy called Pope Benedict XV religion depopulated, which really fits with what happened during his time as pope. When he was in charge, the world was going through World War I and the start of the Bolshevik Revolution, both of which led to a lot of people turning away from religion. A really amazing case is Pope John Paul II, who the prophecy called from the labor of the sun. This fits strangely well with his life, as he was born during a solar eclipse and also buried when there was an eclipse. These sorts of matches between what the prophecy said and what actually happened in the lives of the popes have made a lot of people stop and think. Another pope, Pius VI, was called pastor and sailor by the prophecy. He was known for his ability to guide the church through very hard times in the early 1900s, like navigating through a storm. Pope Paul VI was described as flower of flowers, which makes sense when you look at his coat of arms, which had 3 fleur-de-lis on it. Seeing how these details fit the popes mentioned by Saint Malachy's prophecy makes it hard for people to just ignore it. As we go further down Saint Malachy's list, it seems like the predictions about the popes get clearer, especially for the ones closer to our time. This has made more people talk and think about whether these prophecies are real. But it's also really important to remember to think critically about this. Even though the discussions are fascinating, we also have to consider the arguments from people who don't believe the prophecy is true. Some people say that the things mentioned in the prophecy are kept very general. They argue that the words used are broad enough that they could be linked to many different popes in different ways. This kind of hindsight matching, where we make things fit the story after they've happened, can make the prophecy seem less trustworthy. There are also those who point out that we don't have real, solid proof that Saint Malachy himself actually wrote these predictions. Some experts think the prophecy might have been made up later, maybe to try to affect the outcome of a pope's election. This doubt about where the prophecy really came from and who wrote it makes the whole thing more questionable. It's important to remember these doubts when we talk about the prophecy. They help us remember to look at these kinds of forecasts critically and carefully. Now, things get even more interesting when it comes to what the prophecy says about Pope Francis. The part about him brings up images and ideas about the world's end. This has made a lot of people think and guess about whether the time while Pope Francis is in charge could be linked to big, world-changing events. According to what the prophecy says, after the 112th Pope, which would be Pope Francis, there's supposed to be a lot of chaos or even disasters. This part of the prophecy has made people wonder a lot about what could happen during and after his time as Pope. But, as we talk about these things, it's good to remember that not everyone sees these predictions the same way. While some people take them very seriously, others see them more as interesting stories than real warnings about the future. Also, it's not unusual for prophecies to be tied with big, dramatic ideas about the end of the world. This kind of theme is common in many predictions throughout history, not just in the prophecy of Saint Malachy. We then connect the dots between old warnings and current fears. The prophecy hints at a global shakeup that could affect us all. The last leader's hard times. We're now going to look at a very old prediction that's written about in the Bible, especially in a part called the Book of Revelation. This part of the Bible talks about really big, scary events that are supposed to happen at the end of the world, things like huge disasters and a time called Judgment Day when everyone's actions are reviewed. Some people think that a prediction made by a guy named Saint Malachy a long time ago is talking about the same things as the Book of Revelation. Saint Malachy talked about someone he called Peter the Roman, who would be the last leader of the Christian Church. He said this leader would be in charge during some very tough times, right before the city of Rome would face a huge disaster. Now, bringing this old prediction into today's world, it's pretty interesting to think about whether the things happening now could be what the prediction was talking about. For example, the Christian Church, with Pope Francis as its leader, is going through a lot of hard times. They are dealing with problems like some church leaders behaving badly, arguments inside the church, and changes that not everyone agrees with. Outside of the church, the whole world is also dealing with big problems like changes in the weather that hurt the planet, countries fighting or disagreeing, and people all over feeling upset and wanting change. Some people who believe in Saint Malachy's prediction think that all these problems are signs that what he talked about is starting to happen. They see these big challenges and changes as clues that we might be getting closer to the scary times mentioned in the Bible. But, it's also really important to think carefully about this. Predictions and prophecies, like the one Saint Malachy made, can be understood in many different ways. While the scary events and big changes happening now might remind us of those old predictions, that doesn't mean they're definitely signs of the world ending. Different people might look at the same events and see different things. Some might think the problems during Pope Francis's time are just normal challenges that the Church has to deal with and not signs of the end of the world. They might think these are just coincidences or part of the normal changes that happen in the world and in big groups like the Church. But let's talk about something else interesting about Pope Francis. He's connected to a very old and mysterious prediction not many people know about, made by someone named Anna Catherine Emmerich. She was a German nun who lived a long time ago, around the late 1700s to the early 1800s. Emmerich was known for having visions, sort of like seeing into the future or having really vivid dreams about things that hadn't happened yet. In her visions, she talked about a time when there would be two popes at the same time. She thought this would be a very difficult time for the Church, a period filled with a lot of challenges and big changes. She believed that one of these popes would have to lead the Church through these hard times, helping everyone get through the confusion and troubles. Now, this might sound kind of strange, but something happened recently that made people think about Emmerich's prophecy. In 2013, Pope Benedict XVI did something no pope had done in almost 600 years, he quit. He stepped down before he died, which is not how it usually goes. Normally, popes stay in their position until the end of their lives. But Pope Benedict didn't, and then Pope Francis was chosen to be the new pope. This created a very unusual situation. For the first time in hundreds of years, there were two living popes at the same time, Pope Francis and the retired Pope Benedict XVI. This is something that almost never happens, and it hasn't been seen since way back in the 1400s. Having two living popes created a lot of talking and wondering. People in the Catholic Church, and others too, started to think about what this meant. It was a big deal because it's not clear who is in charge, or what it means for the future of the Church. Some people started to wonder if this situation was what Emmerich was talking about in her visions. Saint Malachy's prophecies, on the other hand, establish a more direct link to individual popes. Some interpret his cryptic messages as foreshadowing the destruction of Rome, seen by some as the sinful mystery Babylon described in the Book of Revelation after the final pope's reign. The influence of these prophecies extends far beyond the confines of the Church. They have caused the creation of books, films, and countless conversations among religious and non-religious individuals. These pronouncements compel us to go deeper into our own beliefs, struggle with interpreting ancient texts, and contemplate the uncertain future of powerful institutions like the Church. This chapter in the Catholic Church's history, marked by both prophecies and Pope Francis's transformative leadership, is undeniably captivating. While certain aspects of these prophecies seem to mirror present events, the ultimate fulfillment of these pronouncements remains mysterious. Only time will tell how cryptic and straightforward prophecies will ultimately play out in the Church's grand narrative. Please like, share, and subscribe if you find the video interesting. Thank you.